Ethan Cross was the kind of man who made headlines just by entering a room, one of the richest tech moguls in the country, known for his cold logic, sleek towers, and ruthless business moves. But behind all the flashing cameras and billion-dollar deals was a truth he couldn't bury. His own son, Luca, sat silently in a wheelchair, locked in a world Ethan didn't understand and had stopped trying to reach. Diagnosed with cerebral palsy at age 2, Luca had become more of a patient than a peasant in his father's eyes. Another problem to manage with money. That all changed on a night that seemed like any other. A lavish charity gala, a swirl of chandeliers and champagne, and a waitress named Mel, who had no idea she was about to shatter a billionaire's carefully controlled world. When she knelt beside Luca and invited him to dance, not with pity but with genuine joy, something unspoken passed between them. What happened next would not only stun the room but crack open the shell Ethan had built around his heart. In a single song, a boy who had been invisible for years became the center of attention, and a man who thought he had everything finally realized what he'd been missing all along. Ethan Cross was a man who didn't just walk into rooms, he commanded them. CEOs stood up straighter in his presence. Politicians angled for his approval. He was the architect of billion-dollar tech systems and skyline-altering towers that bore his name in steel and glass. The world admired his intellect, feared his influence, and obsessed over his wealth. But behind closed doors, in the echoing silence of his glass mansion, none of that mattered. Because behind all the power and prestige, Ethan Cross was the father of a boy he didn't understand. Luca Cross was 10 years old, bright-eyed, fragile, and mostly quiet. He had been born with cerebral palsy, a neurological condition that affected his muscle coordination and movement. He used a motorized wheelchair and communicated mostly through gestures, facial expressions, and occasional soft-spoken words. Some days, Ethan pretended the silence didn't bother him. Other days, he didn't pretend at all. Despite all the technology Ethan had poured into the world, he couldn't fix his son, and so, he slowly stopped trying. He hired the best therapists, the most experienced caregivers, and speech-language pathologists, with accolades that could fill a library. But he rarely sat in on sessions. He rarely asked how Luca was progressing. He made sure the bills were paid and the house was staffed, and convinced himself that meant he was doing his part. Luca didn't complain. He didn't demand. He didn't cry out when his father walked past him without making eye contact. He just waited, quietly, like he always had. It was a crisp Saturday evening when Ethan was scheduled to appear at a charity gala hosted in the grand ballroom of one of his luxury hotels. The event was designed to raise funds for adaptive sports programs, a PR move suggested by his team after a competitor's company made headlines for sponsoring a youth disability center. Ethan rarely attended these events in person, but tonight his appearance was strategic. Investors would be watching, cameras would be flashing, a little humanity looked good in quarterly reports. Luca, who had recently shown an unusual curiosity toward music, particularly jazz and soft classical, was brought along by his daytime nurse Marta. She'd noticed him smiling during piano therapy and tapping his fingers when a saxophone played on TV. Marta had gently encouraged Ethan to let Luca attend, saying it might be nice for him to hear a live band. Ethan had barely nodded. He didn't expect to stay long. The ballroom shimmered with chandeliers that bathed the room in golden light. Waiters moved gracefully between round tables adorned with gold-rimmed glasses and fresh orchid centerpieces. A jazz quintet played softly in one corner, the mellow sound of the saxophone mingling with the quiet hum of conversation. Ethan, dressed in a charcoal suit with a silver tie, moved through the crowd like a ghost, nodding politely, giving quick smiles but already eyeing the exit. Luca sat near the back of the room, at a special access table positioned with care by the event staff. Marta stood beside him, gently pointing out the instruments, whispering their names. His fingers danced slightly on the wheelchair's armrest, responding to the rhythm. No one else paid much attention, just another child among a sea of wealth and power. That's when Ethan noticed her. She wasn't like the other staff members, maybe mid-20s with glowing brown skin, a natural bun tied neatly at the top of her head, and eyes that seemed to hold a quiet defiance. The name tag pinned to her black vest read Mel. She weaved between the tables with practiced ease, offering trays of bite-sized delicacies, but her posture was different. She didn't carry herself like someone trying to be invisible. She looked like she belonged. Ethan watched, mildly curious, as she paused near Luca's table. Luca, transfixed by the band, didn't even see her at first, but Mel noticed him, and instead of moving on like everyone else had, she knelt beside him. She didn't look around for approval. She didn't act nervous. She didn't lower her voice to a whisper like people usually did when talking to Luca. She simply smiled and said warmly, "Hey there, champ, you like the music?" Luca blinked in surprise, then slowly he nodded. "That's what I thought," she said with a grin. "You've got that look like the rhythm's living in your bones." He smiled, a small one, but real. Then Mel did something no one had ever dared to do at one of Ethan's events, least of all with his son. She extended her hand and asked, "Wanna dance, champ?" Ethan, watching from across the room, froze. He wasn't the only one. Nearby guests stopped mid-conversation. One woman gasped under her breath. A waiter paused mid-step. Even the saxophonist played a slightly off note. It was as if the entire ballroom inhaled at once and forgot how to breathe. Marta turned, half shocked, half smiling, unsure whether to intervene. Luca stared at Mel's hand, then after a heartbeat that felt like an eternity, he nodded. Mel's face lit up. "Well, all right then." She gently positioned her hands on the handlebars of the wheelchair, her touch confident, but respectful. Luca's hand twitched in anticipation, his eyes never leaving the stage. The band, sensing something unusual, softened their volume. The piano picked up a slow, gentle melody, and together Mel and Luca moved into the open space in front of the bandstand. They didn't spin or twirl wildly. It was a slow, rhythmic glide. Mel pushing the chair in time with the beat, raising one of Luca's arms in hers like they were old friends, performing a quiet routine. She swayed, guiding him gracefully, letting his small movements dictate the pace. Luca's fingers tapped again, this time in perfect rhythm. His face, so often still, was alight with focus and joy. Gasps turned to murmurs. Murmurs turned to clap. Ethan stood motionless, his glass forgotten in his hand, as his world slowly tilted sideways. This wasn't therapy, it wasn't coaching, it wasn't someone trying to fix his son, this was someone seeing him. Mel didn't stop to care about appearance. She didn't look around to see if what she was doing was appropriate. She simply saw a boy who loved music, and gave him the one thing no one else ever had: permission to be part of the moment. As the music faded, the crowd offered polite, almost reverent applause. Luca, still smiling, leaned back slightly in his chair. His eyes found Ethan's across the room. They stared at each other, father and son, like strangers meeting for the first time, and for a flicker of a second, something broke inside Ethan. Not from pain, but from recognition. To Ethan's shock, Luca nodded. It wasn't just a polite nod or a hesitant response, it was decisive, intentional, like he'd been waiting his whole life for someone to act. The subtle yet confident way his head tilted forward, the glimmer in his usually still eyes, it all struck Ethan with the force of a gut punch. His son, who often avoided interaction, who seemed lost in his own world, had responded. Mel smiled, her face glowing with genuine warmth, and gently moved behind the wheelchair. She placed her hands firmly but tenderly on the handlebars, and whispered, "Let's show them how it's done." She pushed Luca slowly toward the open floor near the stage. The room, once buzzing with high society chatter and clinking glasses, grew hushed. The live jazz band caught on quickly. The saxophonist nodded to the pianist, who eased into a slower, more melodic tune. The rhythm softened, elegant and inviting. Mel guided the chair forward with a dancer's grace, every step in sync with the music, but she didn't stop there. She moved to Luca's side, took his hand delicate in her own, and lifted it gently, as if they were about to waltz. Then with her free hand, she placed her palm just above his, not leading him but mirroring him, allowing him to set the tone. Luca, cautious at first, began to move his fingers in rhythm. His hand twitched slightly in the air, then more deliberate. Mel matched his pace, encouraging him with every subtle motion. They weren't just swaying, they were dancing. The crowd, at first confused by the sight, now stood frozen in awe. Conversation stopped, waiters paused mid-pour. Even the hotel manager tucked himself behind a curtain, unsure whether to intervene or simply marvel at what was unfolding. Mel didn't care, neither did Luca. In that open space, with polished floors reflecting chandelier light, nothing else existed. No judgment, no awkwardness, no pity, just movement, just music, just joy. Ethan, still rooted to the same spot, couldn't take his eyes off them. His brain, trained to process data and predict outcomes, had no algorithm for what he was seeing. Luca, his son, who rarely smiled unless coaxed, who rarely engaged without prompting, alive in a way Ethan had never seen before. He wasn't just reacting, he was leading. For the first time in years, Ethan saw something different in his son's eyes. It wasn't frustration or confusion. It wasn't sadness or exhaustion. It was joy, pure, unfiltered, and contagious. Mel knelt again beside Luca and whispered something into his ear. Whatever it was made him beam. And then, to everyone's surprise, he raised both arms high above his head, signaling something Ethan never could have predicted. He wanted to spin. Mel blinked in surprise, then laughed, a light, joyful sound that cut through the stiffness of the ballroom like sunlight through fog. "All right then," she said with a wink. She took hold of the chair's handles and began to spin him slowly, carefully, letting the music guide the movement. The wheels glided over the marble like a waltzing couple, Luca's arms stretched like a conductor's, as if he were directing the entire room. The crowd erupted into applause, not polite or restrained, but genuine, heart-struck clapping. Some even cheered, others had tears welling in their eyes. One elderly woman touched her necklace and whispered, "Beautiful." Phones came out, flashes blinked, but this wasn't a spectacle, it was a moment, a miracle masquerading as a dance. And at the edge of the room, the man who had built empires with a flick of his pen, who had never hesitated to make billion-dollar decisions, stood utterly, completely still. Why hadn't he ever tried this? Why had he never knelt beside Luca and simply asked? Why had he been so consumed by managing his son's life that he'd forgotten to live any of it with him? Ethan's chest tightened, guilt crept in like a cold fog, numbing the spaces where love had tried to grow but been neglected. He watched as Luca twirled, laughed softly, and looked up at the ceiling like he could float right through it. And for the first time, Ethan wasn't just looking at his son, he was seeing him. The music faded, Mel slowed the spin and gradually brought the chair to a stop. Luca's hands dropped to his lap, relaxed. His smile lingered like the final note of a lullaby. Mel reached down and gently brushed a strand of hair from his forehead. "Nice moves," she said. Luca responded with a soft giggle, an honest-to-God giggle that Ethan hadn't heard in years. Not since Luca was a toddler, before the diagnosis, before the surgeries, before the therapists with charts and the whispered conversations behind closed doors. The audience broke into applause once more, this time louder. Some people stood, others wiped away tears, but Ethan barely heard them. He took one hesitant step forward, then another, and then stopped, unsure. Mel looked up and saw him. Their eyes met. She didn't look embarrassed. She didn't apologize. She didn't ask for permission. She just gave him a calm, respectful nod, as if to say, "You saw it too, didn't you?" Ethan swallowed hard, emotions churning inside him like a storm behind glass. For years he'd hired experts and consultants to help his son engage with the world, but none of them had done what Mel had just done in 5 unscripted minutes. She had invited him into the moment, no agenda, no plan, just kindness, presence, humanity, and Luca had responded, not because he was being coached, but because, for once, someone treated him like he already belonged. The band resumed playing another tune, upbeat and fast-paced this time, but the spell of the previous moment lingered like perfume in the air. Mel guided Luca back to his table, where Marta stood stunned, hand pressed to her chest. "Thank you," she whispered to Mel. Mel shrugged. He did all the hard work. Ethan watched as Luca looked up at Mel one last time before she returned to her tray of hors d'oeuvres. She slipped back into the crowd, as though nothing extraordinary had happened, but something had. Something Ethan couldn't ignore. He walked slowly toward Luca's table, knelt beside him for the first time in longer than he could remember, and asked quietly, "Did you enjoy that?" Luca didn't hesitate. He looked his father in the eyes and said, with deliberate clarity, "More." After the gala, the crowd slowly dispersed, still buzzing about what they had witnessed. Waiters gathered glasses, the band packed their instruments, some guests left with tears in their eyes, others with photos and smiles. Ethan stayed behind. He stood near the stage, watching Luca being wheeled away by Marta with a soft, satisfied look on his face, like a boy who had just lived a secret dream. Ethan's gaze followed another figure weaving through the room. Mel, the waitress who had somehow changed everything. He didn't call for his assistant, or security. For once he walked himself across the ballroom floor and approached her. "Excuse me," he said, and his voice sounded strange, even to himself, less like a billionaire giving an order, more like a man asking. Mel turned, eyes wide. She clutched her tray, clearly assuming she was in trouble. I didn't mean to cause a scene," she said quickly. "If I overstepped, you didn't," Ethan interrupted. He paused, unsure how to continue. "I just wanted to talk." Mel's eyes narrowed slightly. She waited. "Where did you learn to do that?" Ethan finally asked. She tilted her head. "Do what?" "Dance with him." Like that, like it was normal. Mel blinked, then let out a soft breath that was half a laugh. Because it is normal. Ethan stared at her. Her voice was gentle but firm, like she wasn't asking for permission to speak freely, she was simply doing it. My little brother had cerebral palsy, she said after a moment. We grew up dancing together in the kitchen. Our mom used to blast old Motown, and we'd spin and laugh and make up silly moves. We didn't treat his wheelchair like a cage, it was just part of the routine. He passed a few years ago, but tonight, Luca reminded me of him. A beat passed. Ethan couldn't find words. Mel looked away, her voice softening. I saw the way Luca was looking at the band. That kid's got music in his soul. Sometimes you just need someone to say, hey, you can be part of this too. Ethan felt something twist in his chest, guilt, regret, maybe both. He cleared his throat, trying to keep his voice steady. No one ever talks to me like this. Mel's eyes met his again. She didn't apologize, she hesitated, then said, no offense sir, but Luca doesn't need fixing. The words hit him like a slap, clean, sharp and sobering. He just needs someone to see him. Silence, heavy and electric. Ethan's jaw tightened, not from anger, but from shame. That sentence echoed in his mind like a bell. He doesn't need fixing. He needs someone to see him. Mel looked like she wanted to say more, but instead she gave a respectful nod and turned back toward the kitchen, disappearing behind a pair of swinging doors. Ethan stood there a long time. He had built machines to solve complex problems. He had created apps that mapped genomes and platforms that revolutionized AI speech. But he couldn't remember the last time he'd looked his son in the eye and simply asked how he felt. Later that night, the mansion was still. The house staff had retreated. The glowing screens in Ethan's office were dark. For the first time in months, he didn't check emails or scroll through financial reports. Instead, he walked down the hall to Luca's room. He stood by the door for a moment, listening. The soft hum of the ceiling fan, the rhythmic beep of Luca's monitoring device. The boy was awake, staring at the stars glowing faintly on the ceiling. Tiny stickers from years ago that Marta had insisted on keeping. Ethan stepped inside. Luca turned his head slowly toward him. Ethan cleared his throat. Hey, bud. Luca didn't respond right away, but he didn't look away either. Ethan sat down in the chair beside the bed. The same chair he often passed by without a second thought. I saw you dance tonight, he said. You were amazing. Luca blinked once. Ethan paused, trying to steady his voice. Did you like it? Luca's lips moved slightly. His voice was quiet, but clear. One more time. Ethan leaned in, and Luca whispered a single word, more. It was the same word he had spoken in the ballroom, but now in this quiet room, it landed differently. Deeper. It wasn't just about the dance, it was about being alive, about wanting to do, feel, be more than a patient, more than a diagnosis, more than what the world expected of him. Ethan swallowed hard. Okay, he said softly, we'll do more, I promise. He sat there for a long time, unsure what came next, because promises were easy, but keeping them, that was where the truth lived. The next morning, Ethan did something no one expected, not even Marta. He canceled his meeting. He told his executive assistant to reschedule all investor calls, and he asked for the contact information of one waitress named Mel. The staff looked baffled, but no one questioned him. Marta watched him with cautious eyes, as if unsure whether this was another PR stunt or something real. She had seen too many fleeting gestures, too many moments that led nowhere, but something in Ethan's face was different this time. He sat at the breakfast table beside Luca, not across the room. He buttered the boy's tongue. He even asked Marta to teach him how to prepare the feeding supplements correctly, something he'd never even asked about before. And when Luca pointed to the speaker in the corner and gave a soft nod, Ethan walked over, scrolled through the playlist, and let the music play. Jazz, Luca's favorite. The same song from the night before. Ethan didn't dance, not yet, but he stood beside Luca's chair and tapped the rhythm on the table with his fingers. For now that was enough. Luca smiled. It was a start. The next morning, Ethan did something he hadn't done in years. He ignored his calendar. His executive assistant nearly dropped the phone when he said, cancel my meetings today, all of them. Sir, you have 3 back-to-back investor calls. Reschedule, Ethan said, sharper this time. Tell them I have a more important meeting. She paused. With who? Ethan glanced over at his son, who was finishing breakfast with Marta's help. My son. There was silence on the other end. Then a quiet, yes sir. Ethan ended the call, stood and walked to the table. He knelt beside Luca and smiled. Hey champ,
Want to go to the park? Luca blinked, then nodded slowly. A faint smile crept over his lips. No nannies today, Ethan added, just you and me. Marta looked up, eyebrows raised in disbelief. And one more person, Ethan added, pulling out his phone. He hesitated for a moment, then typed the message. Hey Mel, are you free today? Luca and I are going to the park. We'd love if you joined us. He hit send before he could second guess it. She replied 2 minutes later, I'll be there. The sun was warm that morning, and the city park bustled with laughter, dogs and the smell of food carts. Ethan had never really noticed the sound of children playing, not like this. Not with Luca beside him, his wheelchair rolling along the winding path, jazz playing softly from a Bluetooth speaker, Ethan had found in a drawer and charged that morning. Mel arrived wearing jeans, sneakers, and a t-shirt that said Be the Spark. She brought a small backpack and a bright smile. Beautiful day for a dance, she said, winking at Luca. Luca beamed. They found a shady patch of grass near a small open area, where a few kids were playing tag. Ethan laid out a blanket, awkward but trying. He wasn't used to doing things by hand, he was used to delegate, but something about this felt right. Mel turned on the music. This time, it was something upbeat, classic Motown, just like she had described before. All right champ, she said, walking over to Luca, you ready to show this park your moves? Luca nodded again, more excitedly now. Mel took his hand like she had at the gala, but this time, something magical happened. Other children noticed. At first they just watched. A few parents stood nearby, clearly unsure what to think, but Mel radiated such warmth, such normalcy, that it became impossible to treat the scene as anything unusual. One girl with pigtails walked over, curiously watching the way Mel spun Luca's chair. Can I dance too? She asked. Mel looked at Luca. What do you think? Luca lifted his hand slightly, his own way of saying yes. Soon there were 5 kids, then 8. They danced around Luca, who was now grinning, and tapping his hand to the beat. One boy with braces on his legs laughed and joined without hesitation. No one pitied Luca, no one whispered, they just danced. Ethan stood back, leaning against a tree, sunglasses hiding the tears that had welled in his eyes. It was the first time he had seen Luca fully accepted, not as the disabled kid, but simply as a child. A boy with joy in his... Mel walked over to him between songs, brushing grass from her knees. You seeing this? She asked. I'm seeing everything. Ethan said quietly. He paused, then added, you did this. She shook her head. No, he did this. I just gave him space to try. They sat on the edge of the blanket, watching the impromptu dance party unfold. For the first time, Ethan didn't feel like a billionaire, or a CEO, or even a problem solver. He felt like a dad. That evening, after the sun dipped low and Luca was tucked into bed with his favorite soft blanket, Ethan poured a glass of water and walked out to the balcony. Mel stood there, waiting to say goodbye. Before she could speak, Ethan said, I want to offer you a job. She raised an eyebrow. A job? Not as a waitress. As Luca's full-time companion and enrichment guide, you understand him in a way no one else does. You reach him. Mel looked down at her shoes, then back up. I appreciate that, she said slowly. But I'm not looking for charity. This isn't charity, Ethan replied. It's an opportunity. Mel smiled, but it was tinged with sadness. Maybe, but if you're serious about changing things for him. She looked him square in the eye. Start with you. The words hit hard, not because they were harsh, but because they were true. I'm not a therapist, I'm not a teacher. I'm a person who saw a kid being left out of life. And I said no. Ethan stood silently, unsure how to respond. Mel soft. You don't need to hire someone else to fix this. You just need to be someone else. For him, show up, dance, mess up, learn. She turned to leave, then paused. But if you ever really want help, not someone to take over, but to walk beside you, I'll be around. And with that, she left. Ethan stood there, holding the untouched glass in his hand, heart thudding in a rhythm he hadn't felt in years. That night he didn't go back to his office. He didn't answer emails. He didn't scroll headlines about his stock. Instead, he opened a new browser window, typed activities for children with cerebral palsy, and began to read. He read for hours. He made notes. He sent messages to his team to find adaptive dance classes, music therapy, and community events. And then something even more surprising. He dug out an old photo album, sat beside Luca's bed, and whispered, "Want to see something funny?" Luca turned toward him. Ethan opened the first page. This is me, at your age, with the worst haircut imaginable. Luca smiled and Ethan thought, maybe this is what it means to begin again. Weeks passed, and everything about Ethan Cross began to shift. Quietly at first, like the subtle realignment of a compass needle. He worked fewer hours, no longer glued to his desk, until midnight. His board members raised eyebrows. Investors worried, but Ethan didn't care. For the first time in years, he was prioritizing something greater than deadlines, profits, and innovation. He was prioritizing Luca. Their days became filled with music, color, and laughter. Ethan enrolled Luca in an inclusive music and movement program that combined dance therapy with live instruments. He stayed through the entire sessions, clapping offbeat, stumbling through movements, and cheering louder than any other parent. Luca began to blossom. He said more words, smiled more often. He even began initiating dances at home, pointing at the speaker until Ethan played a song and shuffled clumsily around the room while Luca giggled in his chair. Mel still visited, but not as an employee. She refused every offer Ethan made to hire her. "I'm here because I want to be," she said firmly. "This is about Luca, not money." Instead, she became a close friend to both father and son, offering advice, stories, and the kind of warmth Ethan had never known he needed. Then came the invitation. The Global Futures Tech Conference, the world's largest innovation summit, was just around the corner. It was Ethan's stage, a place where billionaires, engineers, media giants, and world leaders gathered to watch him unveil the future. His company's PR team sent him a detailed schedule, complete with lighting cues, camera angles, and prototype reveals. Ethan read it, then set it down. He picked up the phone. "Cancel the prototype reveal," he said. There was a pause. "I want to do something different this year," Ethan replied, "something that matters." He didn't explain further. The conference hall was a glass and steel cathedral of brilliance. Thousands of attendees filled the rows, press, influencers, tech execs, eager fans. Everyone expected another game-changing gadget. Something sleek, shiny, groundbreaking. Ethan stepped onto the stage in a navy blue suit, not a product in sight, no robotic assistant, no hologram, no countdown timer, just him. And behind the curtain, Ethan stood before the crowd and took a breath. The lights dimmed slightly, a gentle spotlight followed him. Every year he began. "I come here to show you the future." The crowd leaned in, new tech, smarter systems, faster devices. "But this year, I want to talk about something I've overlooked." He paused. "I want to talk about connection." Whispers rippled through the room. This wasn't what anyone had expected. Ethan continued. "I have a son. His name is Luca. He has cerebral palsy. And for most of his life, I didn't really see him. I saw a diagnosis, a challenge, something I couldn't fix, and so I did what I thought was responsible. I hired the best help. I built the best care."
He swallowed hard, but I wasn't there. I wasn't the father he needed. The silence in the room was absolute, and then one day someone reminded me that Luca isn't broken. He doesn't need to be fixed. He just needs to be seen. He looked toward the side of the stage. "Luca," he called softly, "you ready?" From behind the curtain, a small motorized wheelchair rolled forward. Luca, dressed in a sharp little blazer, his hair neatly combed, his eyes bright with excitement. The crowd gasped softly. At his side stood Mel, smiling with tears already forming. She gently guided the chair to center stage, then stepped back into the shadows. Ethan knelt beside his son and held out a microphone. "Say whatever you want, champ," he whispered. Luca looked out over the sea of faces, hands trembling slightly. Ethan steadied the mic for him. A long pause, and then, in a voice clearer than anyone had heard before, Luca said, "Everyone can dance, just listen." The words echoed through the auditorium, and then, the crowd erupted. Standing ovation, applause like thunder. Some people cried, others simply stood in stunned silence, hands over their hearts. Ethan's breath hitched. He looked at his son, calm, composed, and radiant. He looked over at Mel, who stood in the wings with her arms folded and tears streaming down her cheeks. He mouthed, "Thank you." She just nodded. But in that moment, Ethan knew something with crystal clarity. He had built cities. He had moved markets. But nothing had changed his world more than this tiny boy with a soft voice and a love for music. Not because of therapy, not because of tech, but because someone believed his son could lead. After the conference, the story exploded. Clips of Luca's moment went viral. News headlines read, "Tech Titan brings son to stage in emotional surprise," and "A billionaire's most powerful invention, fatherhood." Parents from around the world sent messages. Some shared stories of their own children with disabilities. Some admitted to their own guilt and distance. Others simply said, "Thank you. I needed this." Ethan didn't bask in the praise. Instead, he replied to as many messages as he could. He partnered with inclusive education programs. He donated millions to dance therapy research. He launched an initiative to make public spaces more accessible. And every Sunday, without fail, he and Luca went to the park with a speaker, a playlist, and an open invitation. Kids joined, parents danced, strangers became friends, and Mel, she never took the job, but she was always there on the grass, laughing, spinning with the kids, living out the memory of her brother through every note, every turn. One day, as the sun dipped below the trees and Luca tapped his hand to the rhythm of Marvin Gaye, Ethan turned to her and said, "You know, I used to think I had everything." Mel smiled, watching the dance unfold. "And now?" she asked. Ethan looked at his son. "I do have everything," he said. "I just didn't know where to look." Ethan Cross was once a man who thought he had it all: money, status, power, but in truth he was missing the one thing that mattered most: connection. Through one spontaneous act of kindness by a waitress who saw his son for who he truly was, Ethan found not just his child, but himself. He began using his platform to advocate for inclusivity, funding programs for children with disabilities, and championing voices that were too often ignored. Mel continued working in the community, inspiring other families, reminding everyone that the smallest moments, like a dance, can lead to the biggest changes. And Luca? He became the symbol of a new legacy, one built not on perfection, but on presence, courage, and love. If this story touched your heart, don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe for more powerful stories that reveal the hidden realities behind everyday lives. What did you think about Mel's simple gesture? Have you ever witnessed a moment that changed someone's life? Share your thoughts below. We read every comment. Until next time, remember, sometimes the biggest transformations begin with the smallest acts of kindness. This is Hidden Realities. See the unseen, feel the untold.